Let's go ahead and get started now. Welcome everyone to our AP webinar. We're really excited to have you here. By way of a quick introduction, my name is Jim Wismer. I'm the director here at Ivy Experience. I'm joined by Evan Petrie, our assistant director of tutoring. He and I oversee our team of tutors that work with students on SAT and ACT test prep and AP testing. We as a company, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, are a comprehensive college prep company. So we offer services in college counseling, essay and application coaching, SAT, ACT, AP, and other standardized test prep, and academic subject tutoring. So we started as a small company in the Philadelphia area, but we've worked with students in more than 40 states and over 20 countries, and we've helped them be accepted to more than 500 different universities. For our YouTube audience, please like, subscribe, and share our content around. We do these to dispel myths and misconceptions in the college admission space, and your help in spreading that reach is invaluable. One quick housekeeping item for everyone. Please use the Q&A feature or the chat function in Zoom to ask questions throughout the presentation. We will stick around at the end as long as possible to answer any and all questions. Without further ado, I'll toss it over to Evan for us to get started on today's content.
Yeah, so hi everybody. First, I want to get started by talking about what are AP exams. So AP exams essentially are standardized tests given at the end of a school year-long AP course. Now, these AP courses are in various subjects such as STEM, humanities, languages, and others. These are designed to be equivalent to freshman or sophomore year level introductory college courses. Most of these AP exams consist of one multiple choice section and one free response section. The AP exams typically last between 2 hours and 3 hours, 15 minutes. Most of those longer exams are things like calculus, chemistry, and history, whereas some of those shorter exams will be things like world languages, Spanish, French, Italian, etc. Exams are scored on a scale of 1 to 5, and scores of 3 to 5 can be accepted by colleges. These exams are administered in the first full week, the first 2 full weeks of May, May 4th through May 15th. AP exams in the United States cost $99. For those outside the US, they're $129. AP exams are run by the College Board, more famously known as the administrator of the SAT. One quick note here is that if you have accommodations in place for one College Board test, for instance, if you already have testing accommodations such as extra time in place for the SAT, your accommodations are also approved for all College Board tests. So if you've already got that in place for the SAT, you'll have that in place for AP exams and vice versa. Most AP exams are partially or fully digital through College Board's Blue Book app, which students use to take the PSAT, the SAT, and most AP exams, and a few of those are not, and I'll get into which is which now. Those fully digital Blue Book AP exams are going to be multiple choice and free response, both through Blue Book. These are going to be the exams with large essay components such as AP English Language and Composition. AP US History is also a very, very popular one. Now, the hybrid digital Blue Book AP exams are going to be ones where the multiple choice and the free response are both presented through Blue Book. Multiple choice questions will also be answered through Blue Book, but typically these are exams with a large portion of the free response is expected to be math work. So the responses for those will be delivered on paper by the student. These will be STEM subjects, such as all the AP Calculus exams and all the AP Physics exams. Finally, there are also non-Blue Book AP exams. These are typically for courses with audio or portfolio components, such as AP Art and Design, as well as all the AP exams for modern languages, so excepting AP Latin, which does not have an audio component. AP Latin is through Blue Book. So we've talked about what AP exams are. Now I want to talk a little bit about how they're used. So the first major way that colleges use AP exams is actually for college credit. Students can use AP scores, qualifying AP scores, to gain college credit in specific courses. Now, the policies on this are going to differ from school to school and even within the same school as to which exams are accepted for which courses. what scores are going to qualify for college credit, 3, 4, or a 5 usually. And there's also going to be restrictions by major. The scores that count towards specific requirements may differ based on major. The exams that count towards different requirements may also differ based on major. Jim, I believe you actually have an example here from personal experience.
Yeah, that's right. So when I went off to college, and actually this is true for both me and Evan, we're both big believers in APs because we both, took big scholarships to our state schools and were able to enter college essentially as sophomores, credits wise. And we took advantage of that in different ways. But the big kind of example I like to use for AP exams being accepted one way but not the other. AP Physics C I took in high school and I scored a 5 and I was able to get credit for that in college. When I went to my advising meeting with my college academic advisor at the end of my freshman year, she just looked at me and said, why did you take Intro to Mechanics for engineers? She's like, what a waste of your time. You're here to study philosophy and classics. Why are you doing all of that homework that's not going to be relevant to your career? And little did she know that I would end up being a tutor. But anyway, we basically, what happened was that I got credit for Pitt's Intro to Mechanics for Engineers course by taking AP Physics C. However, if I attended Pitt as an engineering student, I would not have been able to get credit for that course. Now, bear in mind, this was many years ago. I don't know what Pitt's policy is now, so I'm not saying this is specifically what Pitt does. But the point is, sometimes courses that are fundamental to a degree, like engineering or calculus for engineers, the college will make those engineers take that course at the college because they want all of their students to kind of get that information in a standardized way, since all their later coursework is going to build on it. But for me, I was able to get credit for this intro engineering course from an AP score. So it looked kind of funny on my transcript. It looked like I had taken that course, even though, I was not going anywhere near engineering courses in college.
I went a little nearer towards engineering courses, although like Jim, I also, so for a bit of background on myself, I majored in two completely different areas that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. I majored in mechanical engineering and classics. And so being able to knock out some course requirements on my end of things with AP exams was actually super useful because it allowed me to graduate only in 9 semesters instead of, essentially 2 full college careers worth of courses, which definitely saved me some money in the long run. And to build on that point, if you've knocked out certain course requirements using AP scores and you're living off campus, that can often kind of knock you down to part-time student status, depending on the number of hours you're taking, which can also save you some money.
Yeah, in other words, instead of paying the kind of flat full-time student rate, you might be eligible to pay by the credit hour,
Exactly. Yeah.
which, yeah, can be thousands and thousands of dollars of savings.
Yep. Another way that colleges use AP exams is in placement. So in this case, you're not getting credit towards graduation, but you're able to skip a course in a specific sequence in your major, in your degree program. This is pretty common for foreign languages or for skipping a JET and English requirement. Although I will say in that case, check the specific school's course requirements for AP credit. In my case, you couldn't use AP English to get out of a writing requirement in I believe it was my engineering program. So again, it does depend school by school, major by major. And finally, there's one other way that schools use AP exams, which I'll hand it over to Jim to talk about.
Yeah, so one of the big changes I've seen in this world over the 11 years I've been in it is that AP exams have become much more important in the admissions world. So it was always the case that you could get credit or placement with your AP exams. That was their original purpose. And they were considered a very minor factor if they were considered at all for admissions. And that's changed a lot more recently. Now, they're usually not required. However, that changed in the past year or two. Caltech and Stanford now require AP exam scores from any student who took AP exams. What that means is that they don't require you to have taken AP exams, but if you've taken AP exams, they require the scores to be submitted. There's a little bit of strategy here, by the way, if you are or aren't taking the AP exam. My honest advice, if Caltech and Stanford are the schools you're interested in, you should be taking the AP exam and you should be getting a 5 in it because these are some of the most selective schools in the country and admission is going to be really tough. So one more thing in your favor is going to be a good idea. These are the only two schools I know of that are requiring them, but there are many other schools that have been expressing a preference for having them and just using them more heavily in their admissions process and making that known. They can be even more important for students who choose to apply to college without an SAT or ACT. So it's still the case that most schools are test optional. They're less test optional than they were in the past, and a lot of schools are kind of slowly trickling back to requiring scores. We did a test optional webinar back in January that you can see on our channel. The students who apply without an SAT or ACT score can supplement their grades and add context to them, which is to say, provide third-party validation of those grades with an exam score. And again, without that third-party validation of the SAT or ACT, the AP score becomes even more helpful. A couple other notes here. One is that you can take an AP exam score and not submit it. I kind of implied that without stating it outright earlier. So I do generally recommend students sit and take the AP exam. So few schools require you to submit them, and you might just have a great day on the right day and have something that can help you either with credit and placement or even with admissions. So I would recommend most students take the exams, but it is possible, again, to just not share that score if you don't, do as well as you'd hoped. But again, the primary role of these exams is to add context to grades. Why is that important? If you've been to any of our webinars before, you've probably seen this graph. It shows up a lot, and it really, I think, is the key to understanding college admissions in America in the year 2026. Grade inflation has been a steady trend really since the 1960s. We've seen slowly over time grades come to mean something different than they used to. So back in 1966, when UCLA's Higher Ed Research Institute started tracking this data, 22% of American college freshmen had at least an A minus average in high school. That number is now about 84% as of the last full school year that they've reported data for. So this is significant, of course, because grades used to be the most predictive factor in college admissions, which is to say they correlated most strongly with what your college GPA would be, especially freshman year, which is something colleges are looking to predict when they're evaluating students. So while we see this trend of grades going upward, grades have become less reliable as that predictor, and it's led colleges who are really interested in seeing, hey, what students are going to do well on our campus to look to those kind of third-party validation metrics like SAT and ACT, like AP exams. AP exams over the period that they've been kind of statistically tracked, they have fluctuations year to year, but you can see that the trend line is flat. So AP scores from one year mean the same thing as AP scores from the next year. Again, you're going to see variation in the data, just like you do anytime, right? Even this trend, we had ups and downs, but the overall trend is upward. I have AP Calculus AB, one of the most popular exams with our students. The percentage of students who scored a 5 over time has been relatively steady, and the same is true for AP US History, another one of the most popular exams with our students. Now, colleges have taken note of this. So I want to share with you some of the things that actual college admissions officers and college admissions professionals are saying about this. So I have here on the left a quote from John Latting. He's Emory's Dean of Admissions. He says outright, we're not as trusting, frankly, of GPAs these days. Students are trying their hardest, but grades are definitely inflated and not as connected to true class performance as they used to be. And then inside higher ed, this is the article about it. So this is in Latting's quote, says specifically that Latting reported to them that Emory is weighting external assessment more heavily than GPA, with a particular focus on AP scores, meaning at Emory, they consider AP scores to be more important to a student's academic record than their GPA, which is a pretty extreme place to be compared with when I started here, where AP scores and admissions could be only really a minor factor in your benefit. Couple other instructive quotes here. So we have Bill Fitzsimmons from Harvard. We have found that the best predictors at Harvard, and again, this is best predictors of who is going to perform well at Harvard, high GPA, are advanced placement tests and international baccalaureate exams. The IB curriculum is another standardized curriculum. It's different from AP. Your school may offer both. It may offer only one or the other. But the point is, they're saying these subject-specific standardized tests are the best predictors at Harvard, better even than the SAT and ACT, which most schools find to be the most predictive. And then over here from Wellesley, we have if a teacher recommends that you should take a more challenging level of coursework, do it. And so this is Wellesley's Dean of Admissions essentially saying that if your teacher recommended you for an AP course, it's going to behoove you to take that course. So not explicitly saying anything about their kind of admissions process and philosophy, but giving advice to students that implies that they're saying, hey, the academic rigor of AP courses and the performance you can have on that exam are going to help you in this process. All right. So, given all of that, I know we've talked about how colleges look at these scores very differently in admissions for credit and placement, et cetera. And so, I'm going to flip it back to Evan to talk to us about how you can learn what specific colleges' policies are.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, college is various policies on AP scores and AP exams differ between schools. And again, even within the same school, depending on degree program or major. Google is your best friend here, but I want to say take a grain of salt with that because you don't want to trust Google's AI summary here. Often these policies can change from year to year. So Google's AI summary can often be out of date on this information or just be using wrong information. So when you Google the name of the school, degree program, AP policy, make sure you're going to their actual website to check what the actual website has to say about their AP requirements. However, I do acknowledge college websites are hard to navigate at best sometimes. So contacting the admissions office or the university department if the website is not helpful is your next best bet. There are real people on the other end of that phone line, on the other end of that email address, who are more than happy to help you figure out what a certain college or degree program's AP requirements are. College Board themselves also has this very handy compiled list of AP policies by AP course and by school, which can be a great jumping off point for figuring out a certain school's AP policies. And finally, you can also email us if you're working with us on tutoring or essays. We are more than happy to help you figure out all of this stuff. This stuff is our bread and butter. We are very happy to do the dirty work, so to speak, of digging up these AP policies. Now I want to talk a little bit about, just to briefly go over the calendar of AP exams. We've got the first week here. You'll see for each day of AP exams, there is an 8 a.m. slot and a 12 p.m. slot. So be sure to check this schedule to know not just when your various AP exams are, but when you might have two in the same day. That can definitely add a level of fatigue. I'll talk about that here in a second, but also building your study plan to account for when your various AP exams are is going to be super useful in being the most prepared for those AP exams. And now I'll talk about it, just another story from my personal experience. Whichever year I was taking AP Calculus was also the year I was taking AP Physics. I ended up, I believe, having AP Calc in the morning in the 8 a.m. slot and AP Physics in the 12 p.m. slot. It did not turn out well. I was not prepared for how fatiguing that would be to have two very hard math heavy exams back to back. And so I didn't end up doing as well on AP Physics for my engineering program as I would have liked. It all turned out all right in the end, but be very look out for when you might have two exams on the same day because it is going to be, for lack of a better word, a bit brutal having those back to back. But there will be some time in between, as I mentioned at the beginning. The longest AP exams are 3 hours, 15 minutes. So that should give you a little bit of time in between your morning AP and your afternoon AP to decompress and prepare for your afternoon exam. Now I'll talk a little bit about exams, or rather courses that have no actual exam component, but a portfolio component. For AP Seminar, for AP Research, and for AP Computer Science Principles, you need to have all your stuff in before May starts, essentially. For AP Computer Science Principles, that means you create performance tasks. For AP Seminar, AP Research, make sure you've got those performance tasks and make sure you've got your presentations scored. And then for AP Art and Design, May 8th at 8 p.m. is the deadline for your portfolio pieces. And now I'll head it back over to Jim to talk about how to prepare for these AP exams.
Yeah, now, if you know anything about us, we work with students one-on-one because we believe that most of these things don't have kind of one size fits all answers. What I'm going to talk about here, instead of here's exactly what you should do, because that's going to be highly individual and based on a lot of things, is kind of a broad outline of what's important to consider when preparing. So, first of all, evaluating your comfort level and ability level with the actual content you've learned so far is key. And most students are going to need some degree of content review. The depth and kind of length of that content review period is, going to vary quite a bit. You can use your grades as a guide, but I would caution you to use them as your only guide. I cannot tell you how many students we have who get straight A's in AP Calculus and then score a 1 or 2 on the AP exam. Not students who worked with us on AP prep, by the way. I mean, students who work with us on college admissions, and we see, okay, straight A's on their grades, and then when we look at their AP scores, it's like, wait a minute, something's not adding up here. So grades are often disconnected from ability to perform on these exams. And so while, you can use your relative grades as a relative weight of, well, my lowest test score was on this unit. I think I'm going to need to focus more on that unit than on other units. But just because you got A's doesn't mean you don't need to study that material. Uh, Practice tests and practice-free response questions can be extremely helpful with this because you can take a practice multiple choice section. There are materials available on College Board's website and in various prep books that are out there. And you can use which questions you missed as a guide to what information that you need to focus on going forward. In concert with that, you really want to learn your exam format inside and out. So doing practice-free response questions, and for this, what we mean is like, in a math or a physics exam, that would be a problem where you actually have to write out the work. Same would be true for chemistry or macroeconomics. For a, kind of humanities based exam, that's going to be essentially an essay question. And there might be long essay questions and short essay questions or document-based questions for the history exams. So these can take a lot of different forms, and there are different kind of, tricks of the trade for each of these types of questions. Understanding the way you're going to be graded is important. Getting professional feedback on these is really important. The first place you go for this is, of course, the teacher of your course. They are there to help you, and often part of how teachers are evaluated is how their students perform in AP exams, what percentage of their students are, passing, or getting fives, etc. So they are incentivized to help you. Don't be ashamed to reach out. The other nice thing that this can do for you, especially true for any juniors here, but in the younger grades as well, is when you ask a teacher for extra help, you're building a relationship with them. You're going to need to build strong relationships with teachers because eventually you're going to need to ask some of them for letters of recommendation for college. We usually recommend for most students, most of the time, asking junior year teachers because, of course, juniors are more close to the college freshman version of themselves than younger students are. And so for you juniors, you might be, able to build a strong rapport with your teacher by getting that extra help, in addition to setting yourself up for success on the AP exam. Um, some teachers are better and some are worse about using AP free response questions as assessments throughout the year. They may assign them as homework. They may include one on every exam. They may do some timed in class. And so, you will know better than we will kind of how familiar you are with those formats and how comfortable you are with them. But just make sure that you're getting good feedback on it and even ask your teacher, hey, if I do a couple of these over the weekend, do you think you'd be able to look over them and give me some feedback? And I would say the farther away from the AP exam that you ask, one, the teacher is going to be impressed by your ability to plan ahead and not procrastinate. And two, the teacher's more likely to say yes because guess who else is asking her the week before the AP exam for extra help preparing for the AP exam? All of your classmates, right? At least all of the ones who want to do well on these exams. So if you're going to ask your teacher for help, do that. A tutor, of course, can do this for students who need that supplemental help. If they're not getting enough from their teacher, if they know they're going to need a lot more work, and especially if they need kind of more of a guiding hand for all of that content review as well. Either way, it's March 11th, and I would recommend if you haven't started preparing for AP exams, start now. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. It'd be great if we had already started our AP prep and we were well underway. But the second best time is now to just take as much advantage of the time that you have left and be able to perform. When we work with students on their AP exams, we're going to start, of course, by matching students with a subject matter expert who's also a test prep tutor, who's an expert in the format of the exam and can know the ins and outs of the free response questions, multiple choice strategy, etc. We're going to use the first session to sort of analyze where a student is with the material and create a plan. This is often going to include, thinking through the frequency and length of sessions. Most students will meet weekly leading up to an exam, but it could make sense to meet kind of more or less frequently based on a student's situation. And we'll work with you on kind of when you would want to start prep. You might be a student who's doing really well in the course and is feeling really good, and maybe you do want a shorter prep time period. You might be a student who's taking 5 different AP exams, and we have to kind of be creative about, okay, when are we working on this one? When are we working on that one? We assign for students personalized assignments for each meeting. So, hey, we really want to work on multiple choice this week and get a good record of what content areas you're struggling with. Want you to do 2 practice tests worth of multiple choice questions. And then we get all that data, and then we can say, okay, I've learned that, units 4 and 7 are the two that we need to work on the most. So then we can assign specific, review and strategy to target those areas. And parents, you'll get feedback from the tutor after each session, a recap email to talk about kind of what was covered and what's coming up in their prep. So if you're interested in working with us on AP exams, I'm going to drop our sign up link in the chat. And then in the meantime, we'll move on to Q&A here. So
Yeah,
thank
looks like
you
we've got a
all for
couple
joining.
questions.
And yeah, we'll take your questions. Our first question is asking, and this was posted during our discussion of grade inflation data, asking about whether that data includes American schools abroad, so like the American school in Rome, the American school in Hong Kong, etc. And it does not, and I do not have that data. So I'm not sure about that data. I do know that broadly speaking, as a trend, we do present to some international groups. Grade inflation is less of a problem abroad, and American colleges are very well aware of that. So that is something to consider that, they are going to view grades from a school internationally different from grades from a school in the US. That's what I can say, but in terms of specific data, I don't have it, so I'm sorry about that. Our next question: how do universities view IB courses and exams? Almost all exams are taken in the spring of senior year, and scores are released over the summer, long after the admissions process is over. All of my son's courses during junior senior year are IB courses, but the only exam at the end of junior year is IB Econ. Yeah, great question. So IB exams are generally not going to be as helpful in admissions because students rarely have the opportunity to take very many of them before their deadlines, right? Which are going to be December of senior year at the latest. What that means, broadly speaking, the IB program is viewed as rigorous, and academic rigor is an important factor in college admissions, the level of your courses, right? So it looks good to colleges to be in more rigorous courses. I would say an IB course and an AB course are viewed sort of relatively equally. But one thing that colleges really like to see is if your son is in this case doing the IB diploma, the IB diploma as a full kind of diploma program, that is viewed very well by colleges because it's a full standardized curriculum that is standardized internationally. And colleges really like to see it. They know that students who do well in that program tend to do well at their universities. So I would say it helps more if you're doing the full IB diploma. Obviously, we won't have exam results yet that will factor into that, but they will be able to see that you're enrolled in all of the courses for the diploma program, and so they'll be able to at least evaluate you on that. Um, Next question, where to register for AP exams if my school doesn't offer it and all schools in NYC don't have extra space now? For this, I would say send us an email and we can get you some information via email. I don't want to take up everyone else's time in the Q&A. I want to make sure that we can get to everyone's questions that'll be kind of more broadly applicable, but send us an email and we can get you some info for how you can figure that out. Next question. For students who have more than one AP subject this year, do you place tutors per subject or per student? What's a typical tutoring program timeline? Evan, do you want to handle this one?
Yeah, so we take tutors we place tutors per student. All of our tutoring is one-on-one. We don't do group tutoring. We find one-on-one is the best way to, you know, develop an individual student's skills and develop respond to their specific needs. A typical tutoring program timeline, it differs for AP students. Typically, we usually do one session per week. With a lot of AP students, that's really all they have time for. And this is a great time to start, honestly, with the AP exams only a couple months away. Um, Gives some great time to refresh on old content and start actually practicing the format of the exam that the students will be taking.
Yeah, and to clarify, so do you place tutors per subject or per student? One student might have more than one tutor.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
A student may
sometimes,
have more than one tutor based on the AP exams they're working with us on.
right.
So,
So sometimes you might have, for example, the same tutor for AP Calculus and AP Chemistry, because we have a
yes.
tutor who's expert in both of those areas. However, generally, you're not going to have the same tutor for AP Calculus and AP US History because it's a rare tutor who can cover both of those subject areas. Evan might be the only one that we have. So
Probably.
yeah. Often one student taking multiple APs will be working with multiple different tutors, but there can be overlap where one tutor would be covering more than one subject. But for us, there's a
Mhm.
high bar for their expertise in those subjects, and that's what we're mainly concerned about. We're not going to just consolidate the number of tutors that your student's working with just to consolidate it. We want them to have a qualified expert in each of those areas.
Right. Well, I'm often doing the actual placing of tutors with students, and I'm not gonna place a tutor with a student if I'm not confident that the tutor would be able to do a good job helping with the subject.
Yeah. Next question. Are AP exams offered in the summer? Good question. Broadly speaking, no. They are generally just offered in that 2 week period in May. However, technically speaking, the makeup window for AP exams is, I believe, in June, which is, it's not after the summer solstice, but it's after a lot of schools let out for the summer. So, kind of for makeup AP exams, but really they're offered in May. This is actually a problem that we sometimes see with our students who are on a semester schedule, where they take a certain number of courses in the first half of the year. And so they're finished with those courses in January, and then they're on to their second half courses. And they struggle with AP exams for their first half of the year courses because they have a big gap between finishing the material and taking the AP exam, which means, a lot more time for review. And then they also struggle with the AP exams for the second half of the year because if they are in the Northeast and their schools are letting out in mid to late June, then they don't have much time to be fully ready for those AP exams. So that can be kind of difficult for them. But the makeup window is unfortunately only really available under extenuating circumstances. You can't just opt to take them in June. There would have to be like, a bomb threat at your high school or something like that, some reason that the school closed. During the
Mhm.
COVID period, schools were taking advantage of the makeup window because of technological difficulties when College Board was rushing to get them all online. That is not a worry anymore, by the way. AP exams have been running online for the most part. and they've been running very smoothly for the past few years. So you really don't have anything to worry about, especially now that the SAT is digital too. The Blue Book app has been kind of up and running well with relatively few issues for a while. All right, that concludes all of our questions for tonight. So thanks everybody for joining. I dropped the link in our Zoom chat if you'd like to work with us on AP preparation. And if you have any other questions at any point, our contact info is up here on the screen. Evan or I would be happy to speak with you. Thanks and have a good night. Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody.